Good morning, U.S. history students. Today we're going to be going over our last set of notes for Unit 5, 5.3, President Johnson's Great Society. Your essential question: what impact do the Great Society programs have on the United States? So, LBJ, or President Johnson, he was from Texas. LBJ stands for Lyndon Baines Johnson, that's his full name, and he started out in politics as a congressman in 1937. He looked up to Franklin Roosevelt and he wanted to become a politician just like him. So, as soon as President Johnson took office, he urged Congress to pass the tax cut bill that JFK had sent to Congress. He wanted to stimulate the economy, and so, although he was a Democrat, he supported $10 billion in tax cuts. He had been in Congress for a long time, and so he had learned how to be a politician, how to play the game. He used various methods to get his points across, such as flattery or intimidation. So you can see these pictures here. He was a very tall man, and he had no problem trying to intimidate people into voting the way that he wanted. One of his biggest pieces of legislation that he's known for is for signing the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So remember, President Kennedy had been assassinated in 1963, and this was something that Kennedy had been working with Dr. King on. Dr. King, who is behind President Johnson here in this picture. The Civil Rights Act of 1964. We're going to get more into this in our next unit about civil rights, but I just wanted to make sure that we're covering this and letting you all know that LBJ did do a lot more for this nation besides the Vietnam War. So, once President Johnson took office, he really pushed the Civil Rights Act through. He believed that we should pass this as a way to honor President Kennedy, who had recently died and was fighting for this before he had passed away. So, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits discrimination based on race, color, religion, or national origin. The following year, he would sign the Voting Rights Act of 1965 into law. This would ensure voting rights for all Americans. It prohibited discriminatory practices that were generally happening in the South, like literacy tests and poll taxes. These were attempts to prevent African Americans from voting in those southern states, and so they outlawed them. President Johnson was working on what he called a war on poverty. So he started pushing through economic opportunity acts, which provided money and aid to cities. This created a lot of job programs, such as the Job Corps. It created VISTA, Volunteers in Service to America. Project Head Start, which you may have heard of, this is for preschoolers. So preschools are not generally part of the public education system in the United States. Generally, preschools are paid for individually by parents, but if they cannot afford it, Head Start makes sure that kids that cannot afford preschool can still attend preschool. The 1964 election, he was running against a Republican named Barry Goldwater. Goldwater opposed LBJ's social reforms, social legislations, all of these programs that he had been enacting in our country. Goldwater alienated a lot of voters by saying that we should use nuclear weapons in Cuba and in Vietnam to deal with those conflicts. A lot of people didn't support that. Remember, we had just seen nuclear weapons be used at the end of World War II. The whole world saw how horrible that could be, and so a lot of people really did not support the use of nuclear weapons in further wars. So President Johnson did end up winning by a landslide. Many Americans saw Goldwater as a war hawk, and Democrats also were able to increase their majority in Congress. So when I say a landslide, this is what I mean. He won the majority of the states. These blue states did vote for Goldwater, but besides that, the remainder of the states voted for President Johnson. So in 1964, President Johnson summed up his vision for the United States as the Great Society. By the time he left office in 1969, Congress had passed over 206 of his initiatives. to establish this great society. He considered education to be the key which can unlock the door to the Great Society. So he really invested a lot of money in education. They passed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which provided $1 billion to help with public schools so we could have textbooks and library materials. This represented the first major federal aid package for education ever. Higher education and preschool got money too. So colleges got funding in the Higher Education Act, which provided financial assistance for students in all higher education settings. And then Head Start again is the preschool programs for low income children. So we were really taking care of schools all the way from preschool to college. Healthcare was improved by enhanced Social Security. There was Medicare and Medicaid that were established under President Johnson. Medicare and Medicaid are for elderly populations who no longer have health insurance through their works because they're retired. And we also have Medicaid, which provides healthcare to people who are low income. LBJ and Congress both work together to provide low income housing, so low rent housing. President Johnson established the Department of Housing and Urban Development to really research cities and discover where we needed more low income housing. He appointed the first black cabinet member. His name was Robert Weaver, and he was the first leader of this new department, HUD, or the Housing and Urban Development Department. They also revised immigration reform. I don't know if you remember, but way back in the 20s, we talked about the discrimination that was happening in terms of immigration in the United States. We're establishing quotas and only allowing a small portion of immigrants coming from nations that we did not consider desirable. So, the Immigration Act of 1965 reformed immigration and opened the door for many non European immigrants to come to the United States and immigrate here. They also worked to clean up the environment. So, the Water Quality Act of 1965 required states to clean up their rivers and their lakes. The government required corporations to clean up their pollution and to really focus and limit the amount that they're polluting into our air and into our waterways. And we had laws for consumer protection. So, major safety laws were passed in the US auto industry to establish safer cars. And then we also had the Wholesome Meat Act of 1967. LBJ said Americans can now feel safer in their homes, on their road, and in the supermarket. The Supreme Court heard many cases about civil rights during this time. And some of our basic rights that we know of now came from this time period. So in 1961, we discovered that, or it was decided that any illegally seized evidence could not be used against you in court. So that means the police would have to have a warrant or probable cause to search you or your property. If they didn't and they searched your property and they found incriminating evidence, it could not be used in court if it was not seized properly. We also decided that the accused have a right to an attorney present when questioned by the police. So you do not have to speak to the police. You do not have to answer any questions without your lawyer present. And then Miranda versus Arizona also decided that all suspects must be read their rights before questioning. These are known as the Miranda rights because of this case. So, if any of you have ever seen Law and Order, you probably have heard these rights before. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, etc., etc. So, the impact of the Great Society was change for the United States. They really brought power to the federal government and it helped people in situations of poverty and made sure that the United States was reliant on our government in case they needed support. So, this is the end of your notes for today. Don't forget to write a summary, a couple sentences about what you learned.